Hello everyone. Now in this session we'll talk about second wave feminism. In the last session we were talking about first wave feminism, which was largely personal in nature. Now we'll move on to the second wave feminism. Probably when we talk about second wave feminism, it was probably Simone de Beauvoir who acted at the receiving end of second wave feminism. We ended first wave feminism with Virginia Woolf, and when we move on to second wave feminism, the first person that welcomes us is of course Simone de Beauvoir. And the second wave feminism emerged around the Second World War, when the world itself was attending to women as a whole, a kind of women who had to struggle a lot to bring themselves to the attention of the government. Now, after bringing attention to the government, they were included in the Declaration of Human Rights. They were accorded equal rights to the institutional practices of marriage, its dissolution, rights to special care and assistance, being mothers, etc. International conferences were being called from different parts of the world, where women writers began to participate, and they began to take pen for the cause in a larger scale. Now, this French writer, French feminist writer, Simone de Beauvoir, was quite influential amongst these second wave feminists, or these feminist writers, she did pen almost 4 volumes of autobiography and also several novels, which did explore women's experience and women's experience as such, and women from all over the world was responding to her work, saying that this Simone de Beauvoir's work enabled them to see their personal frustrations in a very political, in a very universal vein. Now, it was in 1949 that her very famous feminist text, The Second Sex, came out, and it was in this particular work that Beauvoir plunged into asking the very ontological question, that is, what is a woman? Probably this is not a question this is not a question. This is a question which was asked by many feminists before. This is not a question which was posed for the first time as such, but Beauvoir actually began to understand, or Beauvoir defines feminine subject by saying that in order to define the feminine subject, we need to call into question all the Western philosophical and theological terrains, and we even need to redefine the very term human, the very word human. In her another work, which is titled The Ethics of Ambiguity, she asserts that human beings on a moral plane are all seekers of freedom. Now, what is this freedom all about? Is this freedom which human beings need available for women? Now, women in Western countries lack sort of apprenticeship in freedom, and most of the time they consent in their servitude. In the second sex, in her work, The Second Sex, this is her principal focus. Is a freedom available to women, or are women consenting themselves to their servitude? Now, she's talking about the one other relationship that defines human. That is the very base on which she bases all her thoughts. One is, of course, gendered masculine, and woman is the other, who are denied a full subjectivity. Now, she looks at, in this particular work, she looks at a woman from various vantage points, like biology, like religion, philosophy, social condition, etc. Now, her analysis, of course, probes both the causes and consequences of women's status in women's inferior status in the society. Probably it's Beauvoir who had actually begun the search for the full woman subject as such. Men all the time declared themselves as the self and woman as the other. This cult of femininity, or the cult of feminine, or what do you say for that, the feminine mystery, is all the time used to maintain the oppression of women. And this idea of the feminine, mysterious feminine, the feminine mystery, is being passed from one generation to another generation. Now, man remodels the face of the earth. I quote, man remodels the face of the earth. He creates new instruments. He invents. He shapes the future. The woman, on the other hand, is always and archetypally the other. She is seen by and for men, always an object, not a subject. Now, this is what Beauvais says in The Second Sex. Always men are people who are behind every development, whereas women are all the time considered as the other, as the inferior other, as an object, not somebody who has an agency. Now, Beauvais, in this particular work, towards the end of this particular work, she conjures up the image of an independent woman. An independent woman who wants to be an active participant, who wants to be a taker, who refuses the passivity which is being imposed on her. The modern woman, according to Simone de Beauvoir, the modern woman, of course, accepts the masculine values. She prides herself on thinking, on taking action, on working, on creating on same terms as man. Now, among the feminists who had actually pondered women's association with nature is, of course, Simone de Beauvoir. She has always tried to associate women with nature, or she wanted to transcend, or she wanted women to transcend from this the attributes which are usually associated with women. She urged women to transcend their links to nature in order to overcome their status as the other, as the second sex. De Beauvoir believed that women's identity as the other is derived partly from her biology, from her, especially from her reproductive capacity, and partly from the socially imposed child rearing responsibilities. De Beauvoir did not view woman's body as woman's friend. On the contrary, she viewed woman's body as something which is fundamentally alienating, as a sort of an energy drain which was leaving women too tired to participate in any kind of creative activity which men usually enjoy. Now, Beauvoir stressed that human beings are cast in pour soi and en soi dialectic. Human beings are actually caught in this pour soi and en soi dialect. Now, pour soi, P-O-U-R-S-O-I, pour soi, that is being for itself. That contributes, or that talks about, that entails being a self who is consciously aware of the possibilities of self-creation that the future presents. Then you have ensoi, E-N-S-O-I. Ensoi means being in itself, which entails being the other, a thing without future and therefore without any possibilities for further development or further transformation. Although Simone de Beauvoir says that all human beings do have this qualities of pour soi and en soi, Western culture do tend to view men more likely to be pour soi and women more likely to be en soi. Now, Simone de Beauvoir says that woman, in order to become fully human, or in order to become the same way as man, she should, or woman, any woman should distance in a very, should join men and distance and transcend and try to control nature, transcending nature, controlling nature, distancing from nature. That is what women should do so as to become pour soi. Now she contrasts this male transcendence. She's talking about two terms, which is transcendence and immanence. Now she's contrasting this male transcendence and conquering of nature to woman's immanence. That is, immanence means it is being identified with and passively immersed in nature and the body. Now, the full humanity which women need to achieve involves, I mean, a woman would be able to achieve full humanity if she is to become it involves involves becoming part of the superior sphere of the spirit and trying to dominate and transcend the nature and physicality, body, the sphere of freedom and the so-called controllability. Which she's contrasting with she says that we need to transcend our body, nature, etc., so as to attain the sphere of freedom, and we need to attain this controllability over nature, which these are the concepts that she's trying to contrast with somebody who is so very immersed in nature and who in a very blind, uncontrollable manner emulate or be one with nature. Woman, according to Bouvet, becomes fully human only when she is absorbed in the masculine sphere of freedom and is able to transcend nature in every sense. Now, the second critic that we need to focus on in second wave feminism is, of course, Betty Friedan. When she wrote her 1963 classic, The Feminine Mystique, Betty Friedan seemed quite oblivious to any kind of other perspectives other than those of white, middle-class, heterosexual, educated women who did find the traditional role of a wife and mother quite unsatisfying. She wrote that in lieu of more meaningful goals, these women, these middle-class women, they spend too much time cleaning their already tidy homes, improving their already attractive appearances, and indulging their already spoiled children. Now, focusing on this unappealing picture of the family life in affluent US suburbs, Betty Friedan concluded that contemporary women needed to find meaningful full-time work, meaningful work in full-time in the public governmental workforce. Now, wives and mothers' partial absence from home, if they go outside in the morning and come back in the evening, that would enable their husbands and children to become much more self-sufficient or much more self-reliant, actually. Self-sufficient people, self-reliant people who are able to cook their own meals, who are able to do their own laundry. Now, because women are there at home, they do all these things. So, although Betty Friedan had no patience for this obsequious wives and doting mothers, she did not demand from women a sort of sacrifice from marriage and motherhood for any high-powered career. On the contrary, she believed that women could have a loving family as well. Now, I quote, "The assumption of your own identity, equality, and even political power does not mean that you stop needing to love or to be loved by a man, or that you stop caring for your own kids." Now, according to Betty Friedan, she estimates that, or she feels that the error in the feminine mystique is that is not that it valued marriage and motherhood. Instead, it overvalued these institutions. The feminine mystique was kind of overvaluing the institution of marriage as well as motherhood. To think that a woman should be full-time, a 24/7 wife and mother without any full-time professional career is to limit her development as a full person, according to Betty Frieden. As soon as a woman sees housework for what it is in the sense that it is something to be just done in a very hasty manner, something to get out of the way, to be done very quickly, not and efficiently as well, not something to be pondered about every time, every moment, from morning till evening you are there in the kitchen, not that kind of a thing. And she feels that as soon as woman tries to see marriage and motherhood for what it is, as part of her life, not life itself. It is just a part of life, not life itself. If woman is able to see all these things, according to Betty Friedan, she says that she will find plenty of time and energy to develop her own self, to immerse herself in creativity, in creative work outside home. So with just a tiny bit of help, any woman, like man, can enlarge her horizon, can meet all of her personal obligations, and thereby would be able to free they would be able to free themselves, or they would become free to assume significant roles and responsibilities in the public world. That is according to that is what Betty Friedan says. Now, of course, Simone de Beauvoir had her own limitations, and Betty Friedan did have her own limitations, but which later critics did point out. But we can say that as far as second wave feminism is concerned, these were two major steps in the feminist movement as a whole. Another very prominent radical libertarian feminist, Kate Millett, she insisted that the roots of women's oppression lies deep buried in the patriarchy's sex-gender system. In her work Sexual Politics, which was published in the year 1970, she claimed the male-female relation. She claimed that the male-female relationship is the paradigm for all power relationships. She says that, I quote, "Social caste supersedes all other forms of inegalitarianism, racial, political, or economic, and unless the clinging to male supremacy as a birthright is finally gone, all systems of oppression will continue to function simply by virtue of their logical and emotional mandate in the primary human condition." So what she wanted to tell is that it is always the male supremacy and female inferiority that is focused in any discourse, for that matter. And because male counterpart controls the public, because male control of the public and the public as well as the private world maintains patriarchy. The public world as well as the private world is maintained by the patriarchy. Kate Millett says that male control must be eliminated if women are to be liberated. And this is not an easy task as such. To eliminate this male control, men and women have to eliminate this concept of gender. Specifically, the so-called sexual status, the role, the temperament, as it is being constructed by the patriarchy. Now, patriarchal ideology exaggerates this biological differences between men and women, making certain that men always have to be dominant, men always have to be masculine. There are roles which are so very assigned to women that they should be subordinate all the time, they should be kind of feminine in quote. This ideology, this patriarchal ideology is so powerful that men are usually able to secure some sort of an apparent consent of the very women they oppress. So men, of course, do this kind of oppression through different sorts of institutions like academy, church, family, each of which, of course, justifies and reinforces women's subordination to men. which results in women's inferiority or internalization of the sense of inferiority to men. Intimidation is what works in patriarchy. Fear is what works in patriarchy, according to Kate Millett. Now, the streetwise women realizes that if she wanted to survive in patriarchy, if you are wise enough, if you are practical enough, the woman would understand that if you are to survive in patriarchy, you should act feminine. It's better that you act feminine, or else you might be subjected to varieties of cruelties and barbarities. See, Kate Millett is singling out, she singles out authors like D.H. Lawrence, Henry Miller, Norman Mailer as some of the most articulate leaders of the patriarchal discourse of 1930s to 1960s. And she claimed that because readers typically took Lawrence's, Miller's and Mailer's descriptions of the relationships in which women are very much sexually humiliated and sexually abused by men as kind of prescriptions for ideal sexual conduct. See, most of the time the books give you details of, or gives you a kind of ideal role model so as to emulate. So what happens is the characters, or the characters which are being described in Lawrence's, Miller's and Mailer's works are of course talks about those, ideal sort of a woman, ideal sort of sexual conduct, women, who characters where women, women characters who tend to regard themselves as sexual failures, who are unable to emulate the sexual behavior of the characters. Normal women, the women in real life, they are not able to emulate the so-called characters, sexual characters which are being described in this particular work. So that kind of women are looked at or objectified in the real society. Kate Millett, rather than winding up or rather than concluding her discussion of patriarchal reactionaries on a very despairing note or a very pessimistic note, she concludes everything in a very optimistic note. In the late 1970s, women were, Kate Millett at least believed that women were trying to regroup their forces. Aware of their 19th century predecessors' mistakes, these 20th century feminists, they were very much determined not to repeat history. So Millett observed, Kate Millett she says that she observed in contemporary feminism a kind of a determined effort to destroy this sex gender system, binary system, sex gender system, which is the basic source of all oppression. And she also emphasized the need to create a new society in which women and men are equals at every level of existence. Another critic that we need to focus on in second wave feminism is Shulamit Firestone. Shulamit Firestone is another influential second wave feminist whose work titled The Dialectic of Sex applies sort of an analysis of class struggle and the base superstructure model, the base superstructure dialectic, to provide a feminist paradigm to the development of history. She argues that sexuality forms the structural basis of the society on which the cultural superstructure is built, is erected. The tension between the base, that is those that are capable of biological reproduction but have no control over the means of production, and the superstructure, that is superstructure are those who are not capable of biological reproduction but controls the means of production. So there is a tension, there is a conflict between this base and superstructure, and this has determined and caused the subordination of women in all societies. Now Firestone, she is trying to bring about, she tried to bring about a revolutionary proposition to eradicate sexual inequality as such. She brought brought about a complete transformation of this base superstructure, I mean, the structures and institutions of the society, where she proposes to eliminate the so-called cultural or biological family structure. She says that we need to eliminate a biological family structure to bring about an end to gender, class, as well as race. Then another writer critic is Germaine Greer, who's The Female Eunuch. That is the name of her work. The female in that particular work, The Female Eunuch, Greer is suggesting a new way, a novel way of dismantling this patriarchy. She says that women should withdraw their labor to render patriarchy dysfunctional. That is, this of course underlies the unacknowledged or the importance of the unacknowledged domestic labor which is put in by the women, that and the domestic labor is of course historically being deemed or viewed as inferior, as insignificant, and something which is done for free, right? Now Greer points out the sense of inferiority that women passively accept and internalize being domestic laborers. Now she challenges this myth of love and marriage and exposes the so-called oppressive ideology which is inherent in the so-called different things that we do at home: the cooking, beautifying, clothing, housekeeping, etc. Now, most of the time, whatever we saw, whether it is Simone de Beauvoir, Kate Millett, or whoever it is, they were actually focusing on, they were trying to read male works from a woman's perspective. So, phallocentric criticism did not do much to fill the lack of women in the canon. So, what happened is, women as such, they developed an alternative female-centered reading or female-centered criticism, whose aim was its preoccupation preoccupation of the female voice alone. Now, these writers, especially we see Elaine Showalter, these writers actually wanted to increase the number of female authors, female writers who are available to readers. Now, they encouraged the emergence of new writers, new women writers, and brought to the focus those works which were so very devalued by time. They began to reassess, bring out, those texts which were hidden from history, or which history did not include. So the male tradition had always suppressed this so-called alternative female tradition, which was always there, which was actually waiting to be discovered. Elaine Showalter, in her key text or her thesis, doctoral thesis, A Literature of Their Own, she provides with a gynocentric rereading of canonical women writers, which did help a lot in creating a sort of balance of gender representation and literary studies. In literary studies, this is actually a major move. Elaine Showalter herself contributes to the concept of gynocentrism, which is very much opposite to the feminist critique. You have gyno critique, which is opposed to feminist critique, where in gyno critique, women are creating a female framework of their own, where they wrote differently. I mean, they were writing differently. They were read differently. And women were considered to have their own culture, their own characteristics, their own patterns of writing, their own themes of writing, their own identity, which was getting represented through their works. So it was purely a female framework, it was purely women's own writing. So now gynocriticism celebrated a woman as a writer. It placed women's literature in the context of female experience. Now with this, we would wind up second wave feminism, and in the next session we'll move on to third wave feminism. Thank you all.